Welcome back. SBM Intelligence has released its annual report assessing the accuracy of its 2024 predictions about the Nigerian economy and offering a comprehensive forecast for 2025. The report strategically analyzes Nigeria's socio-economic and political landscape alongside trends across the African continent. Among its key projections, SBM projects mixed economic outlook for Nigeria in 2025. The report forecasts oil prices to remain stable between $65 and $75 per barrel, with crude production expected to rise to 1.8 million barrels per day. However, this figure falls short of the government's ambitious 2 million barrel target, hindered by ongoing issues such as oil theft, militancy, and infrastructure deficits.
Well, don't forget that the economy is projected to grow by 3.5% in 2025, supported by easing fiscal and monetary shocks, and inflation is expected to remain high at 28%. SBM also predicts a continued upward trend in Nigeria's external reserves, surpassing $40 billion, driven by reduced import bills from local refining activities. However, let's also tell you that the Naira is likely to face further devaluation, with exchange rates potentially exceeding 2,000 Naira to a dollar by the end of the year. What year are they talking about? Is it 2024 or 2025? Well, this presentation or this part of Breakfast Central is very key, especially looking at the fact that the #1 citizen, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, did his presentation yesterday at the Joint Assembly, and projections were equally made. But anyway, joining us to analyze these projections is partner and head of research at SBM Intelligence, Ikemi Sitefeong, joins us live in the studio. Good to have you here this morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. If we're to go about everything that's been said here, I'm sure a lot of Nigerians are saying, okay, here they go again, they are talking too much. Can they at least make it as simple as possible for us to understand? So let's start off first. What are the forecast projections, and just break it down for us in simple terms.
Okay, sure. And thanks for putting me under pressure by mentioning that I'm following up the president's presentation with mine.
No, but
yeah.
you wouldn't say where the what assembly are we in?
Wow,
yeah.
Johansson.
I'm just
well, I'm seeing one good news here, I think.
Okay.
$65 and $75 per barrel. I think that's in line with the projection of the benchmark that the new budget, the 2025 budget has. Is that good news for you?
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about the fact that oil prices right now have stayed in that $70 to $75 per barrel band, despite all that has been happening in the world, the war in Ukraine, obviously the conflict in Gaza, what we've seen in Syria, the relative escalation, then de-escalation between Israel and Iran, crude prices have actually been very resilient. And so for us, we don't see much upside in terms of any sort of major geopolitical developments really affecting crude prices significantly. That's why we think that 65 to 75 band accounts for sort of like the best as well as the worst case scenarios in terms of what kind of global geopolitical developments could move oil prices. So we typically do this every year. Okay. We have a yearly report where we look back at the reports that our forecast from heading into the new year, and we make projections towards 2025. We generally try to score ourselves. We made what was it? Something like 46 forecasts, right? Heading into 2024, we got 31 of those correct. 12 were wrong. A couple were partially correct. Pass rates of something like 67%, which is in line with the average that we'll typically get.
So that means your crystal ball is really.
We try. There's a lot of brain work that goes into it, and we'll typically look at things like the economy. So heading into this administration's first full year, we made projections as to GDP growth, what the pace of reform would be, the conversation around tax reform being very critical to this. And we actually called it and said that, reforms or the efforts at reform will push ahead, but the pace will be a bit slower. In terms of GDP growth, we projected a 3 to 3.2%. That's largely been in line with what we've seen on a quarter-by-quarter basis as released by the SBM. by the NBS. So that was good. The CBN had a big, this was supposed to be a marquee milestone year in terms of financial inclusion, right? Something like 95% of Nigerians are supposed to have been financially included. By 2024, this target was set, circa 2017, 2018. Very, very long way to go in terms of getting there. And actually, some of the new regulations around limiting POS withdrawal transactions, more regulation on the line for fintechs, right, mean that we have actually extended the runway in terms of getting to 95% financial inclusion. We expected the MPR, the monetary policy rates, to be sub 20%, but the CBN has gone on this aggressive rate hiking measure. So obviously we didn't get that correct. We called inflation being above 27% for the most part this year. The CBN, as well as the president in the aforementioned presentation, think that the MPR, right, will head in a general direction, which would still keep it right in the low to mid 20%. So that's actually a projection that we've rolled over right into this year. Fuel subsidies. Remember in mid 2024, there was that conversation about, do we have subsidies? Are there no subsidies and all of that? But I think it's pretty clear to everyone now when you look at both the landing cost of fuel for, the petrol that we still import into the country, plus the ex-depot price, right, that has come out from the now enforced Dangote refinery, that there is still some kind of subsidy, right, going on. If we can flip the charts up to the next page as well. Just a few things I wanted to highlight. In fact, we could go to the 2025 predictions so that we can talk a bit about what's going on in the future. That would be great. We did mention a couple of things around security, especially security in the FCT, poverty, unemployment, and inflation, obviously, meaning that we may begin to see social tensions and some protests, particularly in northern Nigeria. And we saw all of that pan out. We called the Ghana election, we called the South Africa election, the ANC losing.
What did you say about the Ghana election?
Oh, we said that the NDC would win.
Ah.
Right, yes. I'm actually quite proud of that.
Wait. You actually predicted that John Dramani was going to win?
Yeah.
And that came true?
Yeah, it did. I mean, to be fair, the outgoing NPP had a lot of, sort of economic as well as corruption headwinds, right? Really not stacked up in their favor. So maybe it was a relatively easy call. But
so I think that we can see that a number of you had more correct projections than incorrect projections.
Correct.
ECOWAS did not reach an accommodation with the Nigerian regime. That's the one thing.
If anything, the opposite has happened.
Exactly.
They've left ECOWAS. Right, yeah. So
let's
that's
move away
really
from
big
here
one.
now and see what the 2025 expectations are.
Okay, yeah. So in your introduction, you had already called out crude prices, and we've already had that conversation. Part of the reason why we think crude will remain this way is because we think the OPEC Plus alliance, right? OPEC Plus Russia will not get its act together. Saudi Arabia wants to curb production in order to release that downward pressure on fuel prices. Donald Trump heading into the White House is a fan of lower gas prices. Yeah, obviously, Russia wants to sell as much oil as possible, and it's sanctioned, and so it's having to use backhand channels to sell to countries like India and China. So on the whole, we think crude production globally, right, will actually slightly increase, and demand may not match up with it, and that will keep prices relatively muted. Nigeria wants to increase to 2 million barrels per day. We don't necessarily think it will get to that. 1.8 is a good number. We have done 1.8 in a few months this year, right? So we think that that's an achievable baseline, especially compared to 3 years ago when we were just doing 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, right? And I think that's that. If you can have the next chart, that would also be great. We think that the increased Chinese presence in the Nigerian economy will even become more pronounced, right, in 2025. You've seen them make significant inroads into fintech, into e-commerce with the launch of Timu in Nigeria. Obviously,
that's new, and Yeah, they're making so much noise on that as well.
Yeah, pretty much. And then the acquisition of Lafarge Africa, right, by one of China's biggest cement manufacturers. There's the opportunity for more deals in the oil and gas space, and we think that there are some Chinese players who will take advantage of that as well. We think our external reserves will reach 40 billion, although the Naira management policy, which we've seen come into place, may actually be a risk item for this. But we think on the whole, there's enough upside for us to do 40 billion. We think inflation will come down largely because of base effects. We think like the real upside in terms of the rate of increase in prices has already happened. And so price increases will happen at a slower rate. A lot of demand, which has been curtailed because of increased prices, right, means that a lot of producers within the economy will not have a lot more space to increase prices further. So that's why we think inflation will come down.
I'm seeing here your projection of Naira to depreciate to above 1,000 Naira to 2,000 Naira to a dollar in 2025.
Yeah, so the US dollar is strengthening, and just yesterday the US Fed cut interest rates by 25 basis points. Usually what the net effect of that, right, is for the dollar to strengthen relative to other currencies. And this is whether they're advanced currencies like the euro, the pound, or emerging currencies like amongst other currencies, right? The Naira. So we think with the kind of policies that the Donald Trump administration, right, will institute, the potential for more interest rate hikes from the US Fed next year, there's almost nothing that the CBN or domestic policymakers would do. The Naira would just weaken, just as every other currency would. And we think since we are already at the parallel market, right, we're touching 1650, 1670, sometimes it gets into the 1700s. We think the net effect of that is we could easily cross the 2000 mark. We may not stay there, we may eventually come down
again, but that's a bit scary as well. Even though I do also see in one of your points here that there would be investors would indeed, see value in our stock market, especially looking at Q1, Q2. I think a lot of investors are interested now that the president has presented a budget. We'll look like looking at what Q1 would bring.
Pretty much so. So a lot of portfolio investors already find Nigerian assets relatively cheap. Again, especially if you're from a foreign investor's standpoint, right? You don't really need to have a lot of dollars in order to chase Nigerian assets just because of where the differential, right, on the currency is. So that has made Nigerian assets, plus obviously the very substantial yields, oftentimes in the 18 to 20%, which you will not find in any advanced economy. We think for the short term, it makes sense for a lot of portfolio investors to pile into Nigerian assets. And I should say the one extra layer of looking at where the currency rate is that if you're a Nigerian exporter, this is actually relatively good for you, because what that means is your potential, just by virtue of the currency differential when you export, will be a lot more when you repatriate those FX revenue, right, back into the country and you convert it into Naira. Right?
Okay, because we're running out of time, let's quickly look at the political expectations for 2025.
Oh, yes. So the conversation around reforms right now, what we're seeing with the caucus, right, within the National Assembly, which is vociferously anti, right, the tax reforms, we think that may form the makings, right, of an alternative opposition caucus within the All Progressives Congress. That conversation is already starting.
I think you also had a similar projection like this last year, but that did not.
It didn't pan out because we actually thought it would crystallize this year. It hasn't. But we think that because the reform agenda really kicked off much later in the year than we anticipated, right? A lot of that opposition and the potential for that to lead to political breakaways will most likely happen in 2024.
Number two.
I want to skip the weekend.
Let's quickly. No, you can't skip that.
I want to, but we had a mini cabinet reshuffle, right? And a lot of our sense was that it was going to be a more substantial reshuffle than we eventually saw. Projection number one actually fits to projection number two, which is that if a lot of that political instability is going to be the last full year before our politicians really begin to think about the elections, right? 2026 will be the preparation to 2027, as it were. The upside for a substantial cabinet reshuffle and for the FCT minister to not remain in office is very high. That's why we went out on a limb and called that. I'm pretty sure there are many people who would hold that. Yes, despite all of this, right, the organized political opposition may not necessarily get their acts together. We still don't expect that a formal alliance, which would put either the PDP and the Labour Party in a combined role in a much stronger position to oppose the APC, will occur in 2025, despite how we saw the absence of that. We saw how the absence of that whittled their chances. And back in 2023, there's an election in Anambra. We expect the former CBN governor to get a second term in office, despite all the whispers and noises around his track record. And we expect the current National Security Advisor to take a more prominent role, right, in government for reasons that are more political than sort of substantive. So it's not necessarily going to be on the basis of his track.
So how many predictions are there for politics? 1, 2, 3,
3, 4, 5, 6. I think there are a couple of them. Yeah.
Okay, let's quickly touch on security because we're out of time.
Okay.
We have 2 minutes more.
In terms of security, we think a lot of the Al-Qaeda back groups, Lekwawa, a lot of those other groups that are more jihadist oriented, that Islamic State is still funneling and supporting, will play a more prominent role in the security landscape, particularly in the northwest and the central portions of Nigeria. Despite what's going on in Finland with Simon Ekpa's imminent conviction, we still see the upside for IPOB-related violence in the southeast.
Unfortunately, I think that I may agree with this because, I don't know, it's just like cutting off the head and a new one grows. I don't know if they've gotten to the root cause of the problem. It's not just about arresting the leaders. We saw that with Nnamdi Kanu and the ones before him. Yeah. You keep arresting and then new leaders keep springing
It's
up.
a momentum play. It's like the ball has been set rolling. So irrespective of which leader is arrested or is cut off the frame, there's still a microcosm, right, of discontent on the ground. We've talked about there's also a rebound prediction here. The security situation, we think, will become a more present and prescient conversation politically, and that's where some of his track record may come into play. And we're seeing an uptick in gang-related violence, especially amongst young people, right, in many parts of the country. But one part of the country where we expect the youth gang crisis to actually taper off is Edo State, which, if you have any context as to what the security situation like in Edo over the last 5 years, is a pretty bold call. But we think because the political temperature has come down a bit, they are very important gang leaders, for the lack of a better word, who are also politically connected, and a lot of their people are in power. We think that that will put downward pressure on security in that
state. I think we have one more slide,
Okay, so in terms of the rest of Africa, we see inflation in Ghana ending next year around 18%. It's now in the low 20s, so that's important.
That's quite lower than Nigeria's, eh?
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're going to see more migration of Nigerians to Ghana.
It's much lower. It's much lower than that, but Ghanaians will still tell you that it's still quite expensive, right, to do that. Ghana is also going to be one of those countries where the currency is going to be hammered by what Trump and other developments in the US, right, will go on. So that's maybe the downward pressure on inflation may be offset by weakness in the currency. There will be interesting things happening in Ghanaian politics, right, as well. The John Mahama administration has already appointed 5 people to lead what it calls an anti-corruption probe right now in Ghana. And we know that some of the people that they'll be going after will be cabinet members under the Nana Akufo administration. The Electoral Commission chief is also on the block. Ghana's Chief Justice, right, is also on the block. So a lot of the political machinations there in Ghana may actually dominate the conversation a bit more than security. We expect another coup attempt in Burkina Faso. Côte d'Ivoire goes to elections next year. We think it's going to be a rematch between Gbagbo and Ouattara. Yes. But we think Ouattara gets a second term, the incumbency advantage and all of that, and it's not really done badly.
And you're thinking that in South Africa, Julius Malema's hold will be reduced?
Oh, yes, very much so. There's a lot of discontent, right, within a substantial portion of the rank and file within the EFF. We think because Jacob Zuma's MK party now has a substantial representation in power, he basically holds the ace cards. Ideologically, both of those parties are on the same side of the political spectrum in South Africa, so we expect some, we expect some cross-carpeting, right, as it was, not just in Nigeria, that happens. And then in Gabon, the military currently runs it now. A referendum this year, we think, the referendum which happened last month will eventually pave the way for elections next year, and we think that the current military leader will transition, as a lot of these leaders tend to becoming an elected president. Next door, the elections in Cameroon, we actually didn't include this, but we don't expect the status quo to change that much. But on our western border in Benin, there's been a slow uptick in Islamist attacks, especially in its north and its central regions. A lot of the flow through from northwest Nigeria and Burkina Faso and Niger. We expect that to increase next year. And unfortunately, the civil war in Sudan, which we should be talking about a lot more, right? But many other things are happening in the world. We expect, this is a carryover from last year, didn't pan out in terms of the permanent ceasefire, but we think that there will be a ceasefire, but Chad will get involved, and a lot of the insecurity in that particular country will be concentrated around the shared border between Chad and Sudan.
Very interesting. Can you tell us when you're going to have, is this out? Is it on your website?
And this goes out today.
Today?
Yes.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
So you have first dibs.
So many,
Great.
and I'm sure that in the course of the next few months, we can start to review and see which ones will pan out and which ones won't. But thank you so much for sharing your SBM intelligence crystal ball with us. I'm sure that people are shaking. I think the most controversial one in the political space would be the Nyesom Wike one.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Especially here in Nigeria.